Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is a North Country graduate who went on to leave his mark on the worldwide computer world. Our guest is Terry Lucas. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott.
Well, I've been working on you to come on the show for quite some time because I do think you're not only a local success story, but I think you're an American success story. Boy from northern Vermont, and everybody, when they think of the Northeast, when people think of the Northeast Kingdom, they think of two things almost. They think of the beauty, but they also think of the poverty. But they a lot of times they don't think of all the success stories that have come out of here, and you're one of them.
Well, the thing that's always amazed me with the Northeast Kingdom is that there's a lot of people here that are really smart.
Right.
Just because you live in a little town in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean you don't have gifts. And I think people forget about that. That because if you have a gift, there's almost limitless what you can do.
Yeah, and intelligence comes in different forms. Like I've known some really smart people, book-wise, who were barely able to tie their shoes. But then there's other people who are high school dropouts who just have an innate ability to do something really good. And they, so intelligence is not the same.
No, it's not. Many of my friends are much smarter than I am.
Right.
They may not be as successful, but they're much smarter than I am. Some of it's a little bit of luck, a little bit of hard work, and some amount of intelligence.
So although you do live what I call the American dream, you were extremely successful. You weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth.
No. In fact, you and I were probably born similarly. My parents were very poor. They grew up extremely poor, large families. My father's side has some Abenaki in them. I think Indians of that era, I don't think people gave you lots of jobs. There weren't lots of opportunities if you were, had any kind of native Indian in you. And then, coming from Ireland, and Scotland, I'm a great mongrel from all over Europe and native French, Canadian, and the Indians up in that area.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about who you are. I think you're a 78 graduate of North Country.
That's right.
So, and I think you once told me you were basically a super nerd when it came to technology.
Yeah, I've always loved math and science and history too, for that matter. And I love learning. I think that's to me, if I had to say anything that I thought was my gift, is I love to learn. Even at the age of 62, I still love to learn and read new things and understand new things.
And yeah, and were you in sports or were you just in technology?
Well, I had phys ed. I did. I was on the golf team, although I don't think it was memorable or anything like that.
So in other words, I think you once told me a lot of people at the high school didn't even know you were there because you were so busy focused on your technology.
Yeah, I was. I had a job at the high school when the guy that was running the computer system left, and they couldn't get anybody. So I became the programmer and running the computer system there for about a year and a half. I did payroll, report cards.
While you were attending there?
That's right.
And so back then, no, even back in the 70s, computers were a lot bigger.
Oh, yeah. The computer I used was a PDP 1120 at the high school, and it was the size of 3 refrigerators.
Right.
And it was a card input, so you had these 80-column Hollerith cards that people had to type up. Helga Walker was the secretary there. They did all the data entry.
Right. So here's my cell phone. Does a cell phone, does that have as much ability as different as those 3 refrigerator-sized computers?
No, it's not even. We're not even in the same ballpark. What we have today is magnitudes faster, more memory, plus the connectivity.
Just in a little
thing like that.
Yeah.
My watch is probably more powerful than that computer. Certainly in terms of memory, it's much more powerful.
You know what I remember, because I'm 57, you're 62. I remember the technology that I really enjoyed seeing at the beginning of class. It meant we weren't going to be working too hard. Was when the big reel-to-reel projector came out, because you knew you were going to be watching a movie. And then they moved up to these VCRs. VCRs, when they first came out in schools, they were big things.
Oh yeah, not to mention the TVs. Now I'm a little older. It was film strips when I was in elementary school, which was one frame at a time, and someone would just turn it, and that would be the next slide.
It is amazing how even at our age we've lived through a lot of changes already.
Yeah, we really have. I mean, especially when it comes to information, how you get information, the ubiquity of it. When I think about when I was a kid, I spent all my waking hours. If I wasn't at home or at the school, I was at the Goodrich Library, and it's always had a special. That library's always had a special meaning in my heart, because that's where I got information. I was too poor to buy lots of books, so that's where I got all my books and all my information from.
And I know you don't usually talk too much about your generosity, but if I recall right, you helped refurbish the old stomping grounds, the library.
I didn't do so much of the refurbishing. That was already done. The library was in debt quite significantly, and I helped. I was lucky enough to have the resources to help them so they didn't go under.
Right.
And then I was able to, I think I talked to Mr. Marsh. He used to be the president of the bank. And I needed somebody who could help us with the investments on the library, because there is an endowment there. And I was lucky enough to get a woman named Louise Bonavecchio.
Oh, yeah.
She's a VP there at the library, and she donated many years, maybe a decade now of her time, getting the finances in shape for the library. So I was really quite happy that there were local people who could help out.
So you went from you were from a struggling family, but you obviously, because you were a very, very intelligent person in high school. Where did did your parents instill a work ethic in you?
Oh yeah, I had a paper route at I think I was 10. Might have been 9, but I think it was 10. And I don't think it was a Newport Daily Express.
Right.
I don't think they allowed you to deliver papers unless you were at 11 or 12.
Right.
And my mom just didn't let them know what my age was. And I delivered papers. Even before then, I used to have to work in the Hillside hot lunch, because I would get a free lunch if I worked, washing the dishes. So I didn't even go to playground. I would help serve the meal, and I would eat my meal in the kitchen at the Hillside cafeteria, and then I would wash the dishes.
So you could get free lunch?
That's right.
Boy,
I was very. I don't feel like I was deprived of anything. I really don't. My parents loved me. They just didn't have a lot.
Well, what's funny is I talk to people like in your circles where you deal with probably some super rich people. A lot of people who have never been poor don't understand when I say I may have grown up poor, but I grew up very rich. And growing up, because I think for a time you lived in Skunk Hollow or the suburbs of Skunk Hollow.
Yeah, Hill Street. That's right.
Hill Street, and I grew up around the corner, around some of your relatives there, and the thing is we made our own entertainment. Sometimes in the spring it frustrated the game wardens because it usually included poaching walleye. But the thing is, we actually had, we had a really good time growing up, and I don't know about you.
I feel like I had the best childhood I could have had. If I wasn't working, helping my dad or my mom doing things, mostly my dad. I was out late at night. I say late till dark.
Yeah.
We were, hide and seek, playing with the Garpies across the street or the Crotos next door. On Hill Street. I had the greatest time. We could go deep into the woods. I'd go down to the swamp area, over by Clyde River and everything.
Yeah, where the Daily Express is now, right?
That's right. But there was just a great big rock at the time. We used to call it the Big Rock, and then there was the Flat Rock on Clyde where we'd go swimming, and bloodsuckers would get a hold of us.
Well, Flat Rock's gone now.
It is?
Yeah, it fell in.
You're kidding.
Yeah, it's gone. So when I talk about Flat Rock to people who are new, they have no idea what I'm talking about.
Oh, I had no idea it wasn't there.
Yeah, it's the floodwaters. I think after the dam breached. I think it changed it just changed it a little bit and undercut it, and Flat Rock is no longer there.
Oh boy! And I used to even go swimming to Prouty Beach. We'd leave at like I don't know, 8:30 in the morning for swimming lessons. I wouldn't come home till 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm an optimist, but I'm going to tell you, I've been over by Prouty's Beach. The beach itself, wow, it's bad shape. My father used to. When my father was growing up, just a stone's throw away, that was their duck hunting swamp.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was a big swamp right there that they filled in, and the swamp really wants it back.
Yeah, I hear the current isn't very conducive to a swimming area.
Yeah. So, how did the transformation happen? Because, you were obviously a focused guy. It sounds like you were focused since you were a kid. So you got in high school. How did you learn about technology?
Well, I think I was in second grade or third grade, Mrs. Ledoux's class, and we took a trip to the high school. They had a IBM computer. It's the kind where I'm sure nobody here would ever think a computer could work this way. There were boards, there were wires, and you'd plug in the board to program it. So they had a board with all these wires, and they'd stick it onto the computer, and then things would come out of it. I watched them print out a picture of a Snoopy on a line printer, and I was amazed by it. I think they had me push the button, and this thing just, came out and printed a Snoopy on the line printer. And I was always amazed by that. And I think it was when I finished my 8th grade up at junior high, that summer I stopped by the high school and talked to the guy, Mr. Ketchum. He was the programmer at the high school. Yeah. And he gave me a book on basic programming. And I started reading it. He let me have access to the teletype that was there, which was a paper tape,
right.
Paper tape with a keyboard and a roll of paper. And that's how I got interested in computers.
Right. Now, what was your first video game you played? See if we come up.
There were no video games back then.
Yeah, but when they started coming out.
Well, I did play Pong.
Pong, right.
One of my friends had Pong.
Right.
And we played that, but I'm not really a big video game player.
Because the reason I say it is now you look at the video games. I'm not a video game person. I know nothing about them. But I remember getting Pong and thinking that was so cool. What was it? 2 lines in a ball?
That's right.
And
a little bit of physics to deal with the bouncing, but it wasn't real physics.
No, that's the first video game I remember that was in Pong. And I bet you there's plenty of people, I'd say 50, 55 and older, who were sitting there saying, yep, I remember Pong.
And it was black and white, if I remember.
Yep, black and white. Just, it was black, and then the paddles just were lines. They were white, and then you had the ball that you just went back and forth.
I guess we were simple. I guess maybe I was kind of a simpleton because I was really happy just watching it go up and down. Not by today's standards.
Yeah. So it was just one contact with technology that really set the ball rolling for you.
Yeah, I feel really lucky that North Country, even though most of the teachers there had come from larger cities, they were people who had retired or had left engineering or as chemists and things like that. We were really lucky up here to have all these teachers that wanted to get away from the cities and come up here to teach us. I feel very blessed in that regard, and to have a computer like that at my disposal, in a little town.
And I think, one thing what makes sometimes for a really great teacher sometimes is to have second career teachers, people who came out of, say, industry, where a lot of what they're teaching isn't just theory, it's actually they've actually applied what they're now teaching.
Yeah, I think that's true. Especially when you look at things like computers, or even a lot of the advanced math. For someone to have that kind of knowledge, it requires a lot of specialized skills. You don't just get it by getting a bachelor's or a graduate degree in engineering. Somebody who's been programming for 10, 20, 30 years, their knowledge far exceeds when it comes to computers. Now, I'm not a big proponent of that you need to teach kids programming, some amount of it, but lots of power computer things. Everybody thinks you give a kid a computer, they're going to be really smart. I still believe you teach them the math, reading, science. The things that if they're good at that, they're going to figure out computers. I mean, I didn't have a computer, class.
Yeah, I think you're largely true is, if you can do those basics, because and build upon them. Like, I'm not a computer person. I use them all the time, but I only know how to do what I need to know. And so, in other words, the only way I learn something is when I need to know. I don't go delving in, exploring, and such. Like, I still struggle to even programming the clock on my car and stuff like that. So, you did, like, I once asked you, I said, so is it true that you scored perfect on your SATs? And you said, well, maybe not quite.
No, I didn't score perfect.
Yeah.
But, then again, I tend to be, the things I love, I drill in really very deep on.
Right.
The things I don't really care too much about or I don't think it's all that interesting, I don't care about.
Yeah.
And that's just the way I've always been.
But you did really well in school. So what did you actually go to college that you wanted to do?
Well, I didn't go to college.
Oh, I thought you said you went and you didn't.
I took a couple of classes, like 1 or 2 classes. I worked for a university for about a year and a half, so I took a couple of classes on calculus and linear algebra, and I took a couple of classes on compiler design. But by and large, I taught myself.
Right, and almost like, I don't know if you can do what you're doing now without a college degree, but I think sometimes. Do you think sometimes there's too much focus on everybody going to college versus some people going to trade school? Or
Oh yeah, I think there is. Success is not becoming a neurosurgeon. That's what you want to be, great.
Right.
But I think success is things like, you have a gift. Your gift is you like plumbing or you like working with your hands.
Right.
That's a great skill to have.
Right.
I mean, I can't do it. I can read about it. I can kind of think I could do it,
Right.
But you don't want to give me a saw.
Right.
And that I think people get it all wrong. Going to college doesn't mean you're going to. I mean, look at today. These kids that have been going to college and getting degrees and God knows what, gender studies or whatever it is. I don't know what it teaches you. That's not to say that someone that wants to get a degree in archaeology,
Right.
that's great, but you don't want half the students getting a degree in archaeology.
Right.
There's not a real great career doing that kind of thing.
Right.
You still need people to do that, but I think I love teachers. I think what teachers do are great, but they understand a certain mindset, which is kids that you can teach them, they can take a test, they do well in that test. That's a recipe for doing well at a university. That's not necessarily a recipe for doing well in life.
Like, I look around here, we have some real success stories right here. And from knowing them, most of those same people were not your best and brightest in high school. I don't mean they were, I don't mean they had any disability or any such thing as that, but I mean they were not your top 10 people, but they had a drive to them. So how come you didn't go to college, since you obviously had the aptitude to do it?
Yeah, I thought about it. At the time, I don't think I'd filled out all my financial aid. And then I was thinking, well, my parents can't afford this, not even close. And so the job at North Country, I graduated, it stopped just before I graduated because they finally found somebody after a year and a half to come and do the job. So then I worked at McDonald's. They made me a manager. Mr. and Mrs. Bartley, who were the owners of the McDonald's, they wanted to send me to Hamburger U. But then I knew a guy who was the computer repairman for DEC, for the computer at North Country. He heard I was working at McDonald's, and
this was after high school.
This was after high school. He called me, called some people he knew at DEC, and said, this guy he's a good programmer. You should be hiring him. So DEC, our Norwich University, hired me to program there, and I was a programmer there for about a year. And then DEC hired me to do remote diagnostics, where basically the computer fails, these big computers,
right,
and a guy like me would connect up to it remotely. I would look at the innards of it and tell them, you've got a hardware problem here, or it's a failure in the compiler, and I would make patches to the Fortran compiler or the BASIC compiler or the operating system.
And you learned all this on your own?
Yes, I was lucky when I worked at DEC. They had the sources to everything, to all the code. So I would spend my my waking hours reading microfiche because it was all on you didn't have, back then, the code was on microfiche. So I had this microfiche reader, and I would have hundreds of thousands of lines of code that I would read. And I was reading it. These were the engineers that were the best at the time in the 70s. These are guys like Mel Conway, who invented, he worked with Grace Hopper, who did the first COBOL compiler. He wrote the first recursive descent parsers, things like that. These are all really highly technical things, but I learned from the best. There was no computer science curriculum back then.
So now let's go fast forward. Is how did you how did you come into contact with people like Bill Gates?
So when I was working at NEK, a friend of mine, because I was working crazy hours, I was working 12, 14, 18-hour days, 6, 7 days a week. And he said, I don't know what you're doing here. He said, you know, you write all this stuff, but he said, it's a waste of time for your talents. He said, you should go and do a startup. So I went to a startup that was building the Pascal compiler for the original Macintosh. This is in 1980. And that's how I got involved with Jobs. So I did that and wrote their...
With who?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, okay.
Yeah, from Apple. So this was 1980, just after the Lisa was released. This is after the Apple II, and then Lisa came out. Jobs was kind of on the outs. He hadn't been, but then he had this idea to build a small, fairly inexpensive computer that was Windows-based. You know, a windowing system, not Windows itself like Microsoft, but a windowing-based system that was based on Xerox mice and overlapping windows. So I worked on that, building the language Pascal that was the development environment for the Macintosh, so that anybody could build, programmers could build applications for the Mac.
Right.
And then I wrote the electronic mail package for the Macintosh as well. So I got involved with Jobs. And then a group of my friends, we decided to leave and start a company to write a development environment for basically Wall Street, so that they could do program trading and analyze, it's called time series data. So lots of data comes in, like millions of records. You want to be able to say, take this number, multiply it by these million records, and it instantly happens. So when I did that, that's when during that time between the Mac and their Jobs sent, I didn't meet Jobs at that point, but he sent Steve Ballmer, who was his second in command. He then became the head of Microsoft at one point.
Right.
Now I think he owns some basketball team. But they sent a team of folks to buy our company. And there were 4 or 5 of us that were the founders. And unfortunately, 40% of us wanted to be acquired by Microsoft. The other 60% didn't. So we didn't get acquired by Microsoft. They made us an offer. I wanted to go to Microsoft. I thought that was the future, because they had just started working on overlapping a new windowing system. It wasn't great yet, but it was promising. And I thought that was the future. So I didn't go to Microsoft at the time. I went to since they didn't take the offer from Microsoft. And then I was at Borland, and a friend of mine who was going to be a VP at Microsoft, he interviewed a bunch of us. He was trying to build the next Internet Explorer, the browser for the Internet, IE4 and IE5. And he made a swath through Borland, and I think he took 20 or 30 of us to go and build IE. And that's when I went. That's how I got involved with Microsoft.
Right. So did you meet Bill Gates?
Oh yeah, yeah. If you're a lead of something or working on something new, you get what's called a Bill G review, which is every quarter, every 6 months, you get to meet Bill G, and you produce your slide deck, and you give it to him about 2 or 3 weeks in advance. He has a team of engineers working with him that review it, and they tell him where all the holes are. He's a really smart guy. Don't get me wrong.
Right. So what kind of guy was he overall? Or is he?
He's a very focused fellow. Right. He's very good at business. He's a little odd.
Well, is it? I think you even mentioned that. You once mentioned that some of you computer people, and especially really smart people, you actually have some quirks. Some of you do.
I'm sure I do too.
Yeah.
Bill has he likes to. I was sitting next to him one day, and he's doing this a lot, and I'm like, oh, geez, what's going on? I think it was my very first meeting, and it was very unnerving. I'm sitting like I'm right here with you, and he's just rocking. Apparently, when he was a young boy, he had a rocking horse. He used to rock it all the time. So he gets into these rocking motions in his chair when he's. either upset or he's, I guess, interested. But in this particular case, he was very upset.
Oh.
And, I won't go into the details because it's not flattering, but it wasn't nice.
Right. So we have to wind down this segment, but I'm not through with you yet because it's taken me a while to convince you to come on the show because I said you have so much to offer people of this area, and particularly the young people who they don't realize that yes, you can. The American dream is still alive and well, and I just don't allow society to pound you into submission. So, so part two, we are going to look at what your dreams are for your hometown and your home region. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.